very good evening to all of you. It is a privilege for me to welcome you all on behalf of Ahmedabad University Students Events and Activities Committee. See, we have thoughtfully crafted a lecture series on an ailing Indian polity, keeping the current scenario and the political developments in mind. So this is a second lecture in that series, and we are very happy to have amongst us Dr. Jagdeep Chokar, who has made a tremendous positive difference to the political reforms in our country. So I request Dr. Kalro to introduce the speaker and give a brief perspective about the lecture series.
Good evening, everybody. Should I say Professor Chokar or Jagdeep? Thank you. Jagdeep and colleagues and friends from AU. It is indeed a great pleasure for me today to first welcome Professor Jagdeep Chokar to our university for delivering the second lecture of the series about the ailing Indian polity, perspectives and challenges. This series has been introduced at the AU this year because there has been an increasing and widespread concern about the deficit that we face in governance, not only at the central level in our country, but practically all our states. In the past, it was very common to raise questions, issues, comments on how we were governed or the slips in governance every time elections came round the corner. But this time, even with the elections around the corner, while we would have expected some of these voices to be raised again, what we do find are these voices are getting much louder, more insistent, because it's been quite some time since we really felt the fruits or received the fruits of good governance. The good work that was done a few years earlier seems to have gone down the drain as far as the nation's development and growth is concerned. As I mentioned earlier during the first lecture in this series, ours is a great country. We have a rich heritage and past. And of course, there are many things that we have done which obviously are good. But we also sometimes do things which take us to the negative end of what is in the best interest of our country. But such is the resilience of the Indian citizens that they can take a lot of beating and still emerge as winners in the end. And one of the reasons that happens is because while we have staying power, we also have shouting power, complaining power, and the exuberance that the youth of this country brings to all of us. We have this democratic dividend, and as you saw in a small video clip that another interesting speaker showed us just a few days back, the youth knows how to celebrate. The youth knows also how to demand, and this time they are beginning to drive a change in our country, a change for better governance. It is said that the people of the country, the praja, as we say in our own national language, are those who create the wealth of the nation. But what we find today is that while the Praja continues to struggle to create wealth for the nation, there is another group of the people of this country which want to appropriate this for themselves. And all in the name of providing us governance. And these have become very major issues. And therefore, there is this great deal of concern as to how do we evolve a proper governance system for ourselves. Some have gone to the extent of questioning the institution of democracy itself. But has been aptly said, is there any other alternative? So we have to perhaps persist with what we are doing. But what is it that we need to address, and how are we going to address them in order to emerge, as I was referring to earlier, as winners and provide ourselves with a better governance system? They'd say that in a democracy, you get what you deserve. And that is said because it is our responsibility to get into the governance system people we believe who will bring about the change, the reform, and sustain the system that is required. But when we do that, obviously we get the kind of people we do, and they then drive everything in their own interest. And then we worry, at least the older generation who has already had their innings, worries that we have an ailing polity. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to correct the situation? And in this context, I think we have today a very appropriate person to talk to us on this issue. A person I have known for many years. In fact, he joined the IIM Ahmedabad, I believe in 1986, when I had already spent 16 years at the institution. I was at that time the dean. And we worked together as long as I stayed in IIM Ahmedabad. He continued, I left. His continuation, of course, as he would flippantly tell you, is his staying power. And my leaving was my lack of staying power at the institution, trying to explore other pastures. But for a long time, well before people have started addressing this issue of governance, he and a group of academicians in the IIM system, primarily at Ahmedabad and Bangalore to begin with, and mostly at IIM Ahmedabad, began to raise their voice on the reform that was required in our political system and the governance system that we were going through. If my memory serves me right, I recall that they were the first people to raise this issue of the kind of criminal record that our representatives in Parliament had. And not just the kind of record they had, how many of them had this record, and how they were getting into Parliament. So they were raising their voices about reforming our governance system for many years. And indeed, some of this probably influenced Professor Chokar to also go and study law so that he could use the law to drive some of the change that we were interested in bringing about. Gradually, a handful of academicians began to attract the attention of some of the high and mighty. And then began perhaps a concerted and deeper look at what ails our system and how do we go about setting it right. Indeed, many things in our country happen because of the Supreme Court and its judgments. And this is one domain again where the Supreme Court, with its landmark judgments, has helped this movement and the people of India to bring about some kind of change, to lay the foundation of that in our governance system. And I really believe that we should really attribute and give due acknowledgement for this change, this success, to this handful of people, faculty at one institution largely, who began to make us sensitive to these issues and want to drive this change. Jagdeep, I'm really very happy that you are here with us today and will share your thoughts on this subject with all of us. While I have the advantage of knowing him very well, but I will correct that, knowing him for the years that I interacted with him and to the extent that I did, because you never get to know a person completely. So I know him as well as I could. I would still like to briefly introduce him to you, because many of you may not be aware about the kind of work that he has done and what he has done over all these years. He was a professor, teacher, trainer, researcher, and advisor of management and organization behavior at the IIM Ahmedabad from 1985, I correct myself, 85, not 86, till November 2006, when he retired after reaching the mandatory age of superannuation. He's a citizen activist for improving democracy and governance in the country, but has other interesting hobbies as well. He's a bird watcher, a conservationist, and as I said, a trained lawyer. Before becoming a professor, he was an engineer manager with the Indian Railways. And in fact, I first met him at the Railway Staff College in Baroda, if I'm not mistaken. And he worked as an international marketing manager for 4 years. Having worked long at the railways, he probably also understood very well what many in our country talk of the second government of India. It used to be fashionable to refer to the Indian Railways as another government of India in those days. But of course, I should also mention to you that he got into the Indian Railways after graduating from a very, very elite institution which was established in India by the government at a place called Jamalpur, where each year they would select 6, 8 graduates from the country and put them through a rigorous training program and ultimately absorb them into the Indian Railway Service. And perhaps I am not wrong in saying that most of the most outstanding managers who became the chairman of the Railway Board in India were graduates of this institution. Professor Chokar has taught in several countries, including Australia, France, Japan, and the United States. His professional interests cover all aspects of organizational functioning, cross-cultural management, international marketing, international management, international business, human resource management. I'm actually quoting what he writes about himself, so it's quite a long list. If I were to add my own, it'll get even longer. His broader interests include electoral and political reforms, informed choice, world affairs, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, bird watching. His research work has appeared in very prestigious journals and in edited volumes. And we hope that he will continue to drive the change in politics and governance that he, with a few others, initiated so many years ago. It's my great pleasure to welcome him again to this university and deliver the second lecture on the ailing Indian polity perspectives and challenges. We would like to welcome him with a bouquet of flowers and I request Professor Trivedi to hand over this bouquet to him. I think I've spoken enough. Praful Bhai always says I speak too much. But I thought that I should acquaint you better with Professor Chokar, and therefore I took this liberty of spending a little more time. I now request Professor Chokar to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
Got a glass of water. Should not cause you any worry. I don't plan to speak too much. I speak very little, but then we'll perhaps have a interactive session. It's really a pleasure to be introduced by a person who knows you inside out. And I was a bit disappointed when he started reading what I write for myself, because you learn to market yourself. But he had done such a good job even before that, that was redundant. And of course, I have no doubt whether what should I call him. He is obviously always has been and will be Professor Kalro, because he was the dean who made the mistake of recruiting me for IIM Ahmedabad, and I stuck on even after he left. I have also had the privilege of being trained by the railways in the same institution that several years before me, his own brother was trained. So we have a longer connection which we did not know till I came here, and I found that I had only heard of one Kalro. When I heard of another Kalro, I said, "Are you related to that man?" He said, "I am his brother." So we go back a long way, therefore you should discount all the good things that he has said about me. Coming back to the topic, annihilation Indian polity, perspectives and actions. I am a bit overawed by the fact that Lord Bhikkhu Parekh spoke before me. I am obviously no match on him. He is an intellectual of great caliber. I am more of, if anything, activist. In political realm, I have had no theoretical preparation, although in the last 10, 12, 13 years I have been reading and I have read textbooks on political science, including books written by Lord Bhikkhu Parekh and some other people. But the understanding you get by pursuing a discipline formally, like I did law, is different from what you get when you read it on your own. So I will perhaps give you an action-oriented perspective on the Indian polity. But having been a professor for so long, where I sort of landed by accident, one cannot avoid reflecting on things that one experiences and sees. So I'll do that during the course of whatever I share with you. Professor Kalro started or mentioned governance. When we first got into this act, it was actually governance which was bothering one of our colleagues who was then also here. He went to Bangalore subsequently. And the period was around 98-99 when a lot was being said in the media about criminals getting into politics. And this person who was about 14-15 years younger than I am, he would get more worked up than I did. I also used to get worked up, but for about more useless things than he got worked up about serious things. And I spent about 3-4 months trying to persuade him not to get involved in this activity, but he succeeded and I joined him in getting involved, so you find me where I am. So we found that to become a member of parliament, you had to give only 4 pieces of information: your name, your husband's or father's name, your postal address, and your voter registration number. When I joined the railway several years ago, I remember filling up about 25-30 sheets of paper. To get a passport, I am sure all of you know what it takes, because every Gujarati has been abroad. and so on and so forth. So we started finding out what do people know about those who contest elections. And in that year, L.K. Advani and T.N. Seshan were contesting elections from the Gandhinagar constituency, of which IIM campus was a part. And some of us, out of mischief, said we will not vote for any of these two. We will vote for somebody else. And we had no end of difficulty finding out who the other candidates were. Finally, we found out their names, but we wanted to know who are these people, what do they do? There was no way of knowing that. Around the time a report was published by the Law Commission of India titled Reform of the Electoral Laws. And I read about this report in the newspapers and found it to be very persuasive and interesting. And we got hold of a copy, and when we read those, we thought this was a wonderful document. And one of the recommendations was that people who have pending criminal cases against them, they should be barred from contesting elections. So there was no way of knowing who had criminal cases pending against him or her. So in our naivety, we filed a public interest litigation in Delhi High Court saying that candidates contesting elections should be required to declare if they have any criminal cases pending against them, and this information should be made available to people. That was the start of our journey into this whole Indian polity business. The Delhi High Court said it should be done, and to cut the long story short, we were happy that the matter was done and we could go back to our academic work, which we were still continuing to do. But to our surprise, the Union of India decided to appeal against that decision in the Supreme Court. So we were forced to become what is now called respondent. So we contested the case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also said, yes, it should be done. The appeal of the Union of India was rejected. We again thought our job was done and we could quit. But then we discovered that the Parliament was planning to amend the law, because there was an all-party meeting attended by 22 political parties on 8th of July 2002. I still remember the date. And they decided that this judgment of the Supreme Court will not be allowed to be implemented, and the law will be amended. The law could not be amended because the Parliament session was curtailed due to what was called a petrol pump scam. At that time, there was a gentleman, if I may use the term, Ram Nayak, who was the petroleum minister. He had allotted petrol pumps to some of his cronies, and the Parliament was stalled and then adjourned. Then we learned that the government was trying to issue an ordinance. Those of you who read the Constitution of India would know that an ordinance is issued when there is a dire emergency and threat to the nation, but the Parliament is not in session. So this fact of candidates contesting elections having to declare their criminal cases which are pending against them was considered to be a dire emergency by the Parliament and the government. So an ordinance went to the President. Of course, several people had met the President and warned him, because Abdul Kalam had been elected President recently and he was considered to be a non-political person. So about 30 people met him from all over the country and told him that this ordinance might be unconstitutional. He returned the ordinance, but the next day the Attorney General took it to him and then he had to sign it under the convention. So the law stood amended. We challenged that amendment of the law in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declared that amendment unconstitutional and null and void on 13th of March 2003. So beginning December 99 till March 2003 was the period during which we learnt what does it mean to do anything related to politics. And since then I started paying attention to politics as an individual. Of course, as Professor Kalro said, I ended up doing law, so I was a student of Gujarat University, which is now your competing university. So I did LLB from Gujarat University and now I am a practicing lawyer. But why I told you this is, I can tell you that the Indian polity is certainly ailing. But as a student of organizations, I have also often dabbled in this topic called organizational effectiveness. How do we say that an organization is effective? Several years ago, a couple of people, Peters and Waterman, Tom Peters and Robert Waterman wrote a book called In Search of Excellence, where they analyzed 10 most successful companies over the last 25 years and drew out lessons for excellence. That book became a rage, and the McKinsey model of 7S became a very popular model. But after 10 years, those 10 companies or 25 companies did not exist. So assessing organizational effectiveness is a very complex thing. As a student of organizations, I have tried to assess the effectiveness of political parties and effectiveness of an organization which we might conceive of as Government of India. It's very difficult, pretty much impossible. When you try and assess the effectiveness of Indian democracy, it is even more difficult. Lord Parekh obviously can do a better job of that. But in my way of thinking, one way of assessing the effectiveness of an organization is to compare it with other similar organizations. So if we follow that metric and decide to compare Indian democracy with its neighborhood, so we can start from the extreme south. We have a country called Sri Lanka, which is also a democracy. We can go anti-clockwise and come all the way to Afghanistan, Pakistan. And I believe that Indian democracy in a very good shape as compared to its neighborhood. The other appropriate reference point could be countries which became free and got rid of the colonial rule around the same time, in the 40s and 50s. I am sure a lot of you are not old enough to remember that time. Some of us are, and most of them are sitting in the front rows actually. If we do that comparison, we also find that there are very few countries in the world who became free in the 40s and the 50s and have continued to be democracies uninterruptedly. India has that unique distinction. So I want to tell you, the young friends here particularly, yes, Indian democracy is ailing, and I am the first one, and I will tell you horrifying stories which happened subsequent to 2003, personal experiences of what is wrong with Indian democracy. But that is not with the intention of condemning Indian democracy. The fact is that we are trying to make Indian democracy better than what it is currently, what it has been over the last 20-30 years. And the most eloquent testimony to the strength of Indian democracy is that people like me, people like my colleagues, we continue to do what we are doing. We have permission from the government to do what we are doing. We have a registration by the Ministry of Home Affairs to do what we are doing. Of course, once in a while we have some minor pinpricks, but we are free to do what we want. After our High Court and Supreme Court judgments in 1999 to 2003, a group in Bangladesh they asked us for copies of our petition. They filed the same petition in Bangladesh. They got a decision from the Supreme Court to do exactly what we had done here. Their election commission could not and did not implement it. And I met this person about 3 months ago in a conference in Bangalore, and he said all his supporters have disappeared and he is worried whether how long will he live. I have no such worry so far. So Indian democracy is in good shape, but we need to make it better, and we need to look at the situation, how the Indian polity today is. And I would submit to you that the Indian polity today is in a major convulsion. Actually, I wrote a piece recently for India Today Digital, saying that Indian democracy has started convulsing. I first thought I should title it Indian Democracy Convulses. Then I thought that that could be interpreted to mean, since in law I understood that interpretation is a key thing, that could be interpreted to mean that Indian democracy convulsed, and it has convulsed. So I am describing that convulsion. So I said it has started convulsing. The events of the last 2 or 3 years, I think, have brought Indian democracy at a juncture where what in Sanskrit and I suppose in Gujarati too is called manthan. There is a huge turmoil in the Indian polity. Now, whether that turmoil is a result of the ailment that it has suffered for so long, and now a surgical process is going on, and we don't know what will happen. Every surgery, having undergone a quadruple bypass 15 years ago, I realized that every single surgery has an undeterminable outcome. The surgical process may be standardized, but every body, every human organism reacts differently. Indian polity is an organism the kind of which does not exist, has not existed ever. I don't know whether it will exist in future or not, but it has not. A complexity of the type that India represents, where this fascinating dream of every person having an equal vote was put into effect 60 odd years ago. Women did not get a vote in Scandinavian countries till India got it, or till after India got it. So Indian democracy is a tremendous, tremendous challenge for all of us, more for you folks. Another of my favorite things that I say is that, for people like me, it is another 5, 10, 15, at the most 20 years. But for people like you, maybe 50% of you will go out of the country and to go to the promised land. From Gujarat, more people go. But, 50% of you, 30% of you will have to live here for 60, 70 years. It is imperative for you to do something that this democracy becomes healthier and healthier. To say that, we can do something and democracy will be healthy and then we can sort of rest in peace is not going to happen, because there is a very well-known saying that democracy is not a destination, it is a journey. And every citizen has to work for it all the time. The recent experiments that have been going on in Delhi, particularly the so-called Aam Aadmi Party, a lot of people ask about that, and I should preempt that question and sort of share my view. I have worked with these people who run the Aam Aadmi Party for the last 10-15 years. But because we are a political reform organization, we are apolitical and we are equidistant from all political parties. So ever since they formed a party, we don't work with them. But the success or failure of this experiment is not dependent either on a single party or a single person. This churning in Indian democracy I think began some 15, 20 years ago. Very, very slowly. It has now come to the surface. And this group of people have a leading role for the time being. But let us be clear, theirs is not the only role. It is not X versus the rest of India. Whole of India is playing this role. In this churning of Indian democracy, all political parties have a role to play. And they are actually playing it, whether we believe it or not. Every single political party, however regional, however small, is playing a role. The media is playing a role. The so-called intelligentsia, people like us, are playing a role. The corporate world is playing a role. But the most important role is actually being played, whether passively or actively, by the citizenry of the country. If the citizens of the country don't work to repair this ailment, it is not going to be repaired. So it is an experiment which is not a one-day affair. One action of the Delhi government is not going to determine whether it succeeds or fails. Even the 2014 Lok Sabha elections are not going to determine that. It can fail any day, the experiment. Those of you who do experiments in laboratories would know. If you do a long-term experiment, it can fail at any point. But for it to succeed, it takes time. So the rebuilding of Indian democracy is not a one-day or one election project. It is perhaps 2 or 3 election cycles. If this experiment is going to work, it will take maybe 5, 10 or 15 years. And after 10 or 15 years, we can perhaps see that Indian polity is healthier than it was in 2013. The Supreme Court and some other agencies have played their role. Beginning with June 3rd last year, there have been a series of decisions, which is a very interesting phenomenon. There was a decision by the Central Information Commission and as many as 5 judgments, 4 by the Supreme Court, 1 by a High Court, which have contributed to a movement in this direction. However, only one of them has resulted some change on the ground. All the others are still work in process. And let me share one, after which I will stop and we will have questions. In 2000 when we started doing this work in 1999, 2003, we found that candidates had a lot of criminal cases against them. They had money, their wealth was very high. And in 5 years, the wealth would increase 400%, 1000%. And we shared this data with people at large through the media and everything. So in 2004, there were 125 members of the Lok Sabha who had criminal cases pending against them. Came 2009 and we thought we had succeeded. And we discovered there were 162. So we got a shock, saying, what have we been doing all this time? And then we discovered that how does a person contest election? Has any of you thought of contesting an election amongst the youth? So before contesting an election, what do you need to do? Yeah. Sorry? Loudly. Assuming you are 25 years of age. Anyway, let me make it simple in the interest of time. I don't want to conduct a class here, although I would love to. You need the nomination from a political party. Although technically there can be independent candidates, but historically the number of independent candidates and the number of independent candidates elected has been going down. There is data for the last several years. So you need to be a serious contender in an election, you need to have a ticket. So how do you get a ticket? By pleasing the party. Or by satisfying the party that you can win. So you must have winnability. This is a new word that is in circulation now, winnability. Now, when you say the party, whom do you mean? Few leaders. The high command. It varies from one to many. How many? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there is a group of people who give out these tickets for a variety of considerations, some mentionable and some not mentionable. So once you get a ticket, then we come into play. I didn't ask that question here. I have asked this question to thousands of audiences in the last 10 odd years. I asked people, where does the government come from? And the